To take us through the funding landscape of today and how we might build capital stacks with communities in mind are Jack Fritzinger, founding partner at Node, and La Toya Niles, senior grants and partnership manager at Sustainable Cities Fund. So please join me in welcoming Jack and La Toya up to the stage.
All right. Thank you, Jeanette. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here and chat with all of you throughout the day and engage in the workshops. Thanks for that introduction, Jeanette. La Toya, maybe we can spend these first couple minutes here giving a little bit more background. I know you have approached this topic from so many different angles, from the utility side, from the city side, from the health side, from a funder perspective. Can you share a little bit more about that arc of your career so far and how you've engaged with this topic?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to try to be brief. You'll see through the course of this conversation that I tend to expound, so I'll try my best because I know we're on time. We're limited on time, but one of the key things that I've realized throughout, as you heard from Jack, that very diverse career has been the fact that capital and access to wealth is very hard to connect to both people and places all the time. So that's one of the key things throughout my whole entire career. I've been trying to figure out how do we solve for that? From a program perspective, working with the Department of Small Business Services and their commercial revitalization team, like how do we bring capital? How do we actually help with infrastructure when we're thinking about small businesses, when we think about the ecosystem in which they operate within? Then going to HPD, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, former government official, acronyms will be throughout the course of this whole entire thing. How do we think about the built infrastructure and what it takes, since that's a very capital intensive industry, to actually make sure that we're bringing to communities the buildings, the resources that they need when we have the opportunity to do so. And then taking all of that, I decided, and I'm just like, the utility perspective, they also have a stake in the game. When we think about our urban underground, they have a lot of infrastructure within this city. How do we leverage the opportunity that they have to finance these new different types of developments as they're going into communities, thinking about maybe not doing additional pipe infrastructure, but like how do we offset that with maybe some incentive programs? How do we connect community to that? How do we connect different stakeholders to that in order to make sure that we're also, once again, getting what we need? The whole entire piece there is, from an implementer perspective, we need to be thinking about these challenges head on from the onset so that we're building the right types of programs. And I've also decided to be a researcher within this space. It's wonderful to be at NYU, where I'm currently getting my PhD. I feel like I'm in these buildings all the time as a result. But we need to also understand, what does the financial engineering piece look like as we pair that with the actual infrastructure, the technology piece? So how are we bringing these two spaces together to ensure that we can advance communities? But as I said, very diverse, and I've enjoyed that journey, and I'm really happy that I get a chance to share and impart some of that knowledge today. I would also love for the opportunity for you to share, Jack, because I feel as though, in addition to the tech and infrastructure side, which I'm bringing, the fact that you've been an ecosystem builder in the course of this and working with so many different stakeholders throughout your journey is so important to this conversation. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what that journey looked like for you, and how you kind of like decided to focus on that space?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I love ecosystem building. I think it's essential. We're seeing a great example of it here with what the Urban Future Lab has done with NYU and their partners at Wells Fargo. So thank you for bringing us all together. From my journey, I started on the entrepreneurial side as a founder in the tech space and worked in a bunch of different industries there: biotech, telecommunications, IoT, and was seeking kind of more values alignment, as I know some of you in the crowd have maybe experienced, and looking for something in maybe climate or healthcare or education, something that felt more connected. Fell in love with the climate space and ended up starting a global fellowship program called On Deck Climate Tech, where we supported entrepreneurs, policymakers, investors across the climate landscape and across the world. And I thought that that would be a jumping in point for me to pick a lane and like, okay, I'm going to go into this technology or this sector. And instead, what I really resonated with was the ecosystem building side, and kind of came to this personal mission statement for myself of, I can have the greatest impact in the climate space by amplifying the impact of others. And I think that's rooted a lot in the community engagement pieces that we're talking about here. So for the last 5 years, I've been 100% focused on supporting climate tech, and the ecosystem building part largely looks like building programs and communities and resources that can support amazing climate entrepreneurs like Sue at scale. And have been working primarily with early stage climate companies, but then in the last year or so have really been seeing this gap at the growth stage level with companies trying to do their first commercial scale deployments. And I'm excited for us to pick into that today because it is so capital intensive, especially for climate space, which are often building infrastructure or physical assets that are CapEx heavy. How do you bridge that gap? How do you get to a first of a kind commercial scale deployment?
Thank you so much for that. And really interested in hearing your perspective, considering the time that we're in today. Once again, we don't really need to dive too much deeply. We all know that we're experiencing financing challenges, especially when it comes from the federal government. But that's very hard for some of these first of a kind organizations who are often reliant on that funding for proof of concept, for understanding how do they expand on their customer segmentation and their marketing. In the course of your work, I would love to hear a little bit more about, like, do you have any advice for these different first-of-kind organizations now that we see that funding for that kind of foundational work is being reduced? Like, what are some of the strategies that you're implementing and advice that you're giving to these different types of companies based on where we are right now in the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Jeanette called it a moment earlier, and it certainly is a big one. 2025 looks very different than the last 4 years under the Biden administration, where the primary, kind of rallying cry of Energy Secretary Granholm was deploy, deploy, deploy. And the US federal government played a massive role in de-risking early stage climate technologies. And they did that through all kinds of different financial incentives, tax credits, low interest rate loans, non-dilutive grant funding. Now we're seeing, unfortunately, and just saw last Friday, a big example of this with $3.7 billion of projects canceled by OSED, that the federal government is not looking to play that role anymore, or is at least looking to do it more selectively, perhaps nuclear, geothermal, grid resilience, but not across the board. And so where should an entrepreneur look? Well, I've got, it's a difficult path because everyone is out there looking for alternative funding sources, so it's highly competitive. But a couple pieces of advice. One would be to diversify those funding sources. I think we think about venture capital first and foremost often as entrepreneurs, but what are the other assets of your business that you might be able to leverage to unlock other forms of capital? So for example, across the debt spectrum, thinking about venture debt, thinking about equipment financing, thinking about city and state grants, which I know is a lot of the work you're doing with Sustainable Cities Fund. How can you tap into more local forms of non-dilutive capital that can support you as your business grows? So there's a lot that's still out there, and there are a lot of organizations that are focused on kind of bringing that to the forefront. But I think showing that the tech side is working is a really helpful way. How can you show traction? How can you show progress as scrappily as possible? But the tech side is also only one piece of the equation, and a big thing that we're here to talk about today is, what is the community side, and how can that be, one of the things that can really benefit companies? I think we saw it with Sue talking earlier about how big of a piece that community engagement is to their plan. So can you talk a little bit about what does it look like on the social and community side?
Absolutely. And hopefully this comes as no surprise to many of the people who are in the room, because you're thinking about what does community do for my project? How can I engage with them at different aspects? And the reason why it's so foundational is because a community, the community, as we keep saying, at large, can have so many different impacts on your work, whether that's through helping you to accelerate some of your work, right? They could be the key advocates and advisors for what you're doing, but they can also be a key barrier if you're not engaging with them early and understanding their perspectives as you shape the product and what you're doing. As you heard from Sue, once he started talking to people, he realized there's actually a large gap here that I can actually leverage what I'm doing to build on it, to expand on it. And that's the key thing I feel like we often forget. We think about the community as just being like my marketing agent, without thinking actually they have a stake, they have an opinion, and they can actually help you to really design better in regards to what you're doing. So my key advice there as you're thinking about community and the fact that it can be either a barrier or asset is start early. Understand the landscapes that you're actually engaging with, as well as making sure that once you have that buy-in, you have that solidified and documented so that you can actually take that to an investor and be like, I actually have community buy-in. I have an MOU with the key organizations, or I've done this in tandem with the community-based organization, and I can get that nonprofit side of funding, because governments are often funding the CBOs or the nonprofits. Like, I have my advocate on that side that I can actually work with them and braid in that funding together.
Yeah, I think that, there's been kind of a progression in the way that we think about community engagement. And speaking a little bit from the investor perspective, I used to see a lot more of looking at community engagement as a risk, that this is a risk to mitigate, that a community could potentially derail your process, could slow down your permitting. And so you want to get community on board to check the box and make sure that your project can move forward. But a lot of what we're seeing now, and I'm so glad that we're seeing it, is community as an accelerant, as a benefit, as a public good. And so picking one example, I might call out Gemini Solar, just kind of completed last year a roughly 700 megawatt solar and battery project in Nevada, and did a really good job of some of the things you're talking about. One is, how do you engage early? How do you be really proactive in talking to not just the residents, but the small businesses, yes, the local lawmakers, the civic leaders, the CBOs. And then secondly, thinking about what am I bringing to them? It's not like you can just present your project and they're all going to be on board and excited about it. How are you going to invest in local infrastructure? How are you going to invest in public amenities? How are you going to create job and workforce development programs that benefit the community? You can't come just asking. You need to come giving. And I would love to hear some more, what do some of those benefits look like that can come from effective community engagement plans?
I think you definitely mentioned a couple just now in regards to if you're coming into an organization, and actually maybe we should take a step back and define community. We're going to be talking about it a lot today. And I don't know what standpoint each one of you guys are coming into when you say community. Maybe you're thinking about the residents, and then that's potentially the workforce component in regards to what you can bring. How are you bringing tangible living wage jobs to a space? But that's only one part. When you think about the community, you're also thinking about the CBOs, the community-based organizations. They may be your co-creators, the ones who are actually your nonprofit side for the funding space. As I said, some grants are just for nonprofits. Are you working with them in tandem to make sure that you can braid your funding together? They may be interested in what you can do because you're going to advance their mission. You're going to help them have deeper impact within a space. So for them, what they're looking for is very different. Like, are you advancing my mission? Are you helping me to actually do the things that I'm mandated to do as part of my 501c3? Then you have on the side of multiple different institutions. These are large anchor organizations that might be within a space. Are you thinking about them? Your libraries, your museums. How are you potentially integrating with them if they are part of the ecosystem that you're working within? And then, of course, how are you working with the maybe utilities or the government entities as they're also thinking about what does that community entail? So each one of them has a different benefit that they're looking for. They have a different way that they want to potentially connect with you. And so understanding what you mean by community, and hopefully it's a combination of all of them, is going to really help you define the best benefit and how you're actually pitching that to them so that they're actually working with you throughout that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm watching our time tick down. It's going so fast. A couple things that I know we wanted to touch on are both from the entrepreneur's perspective, how can you think about developing the financing for, an advanced energy project within a community? And then from the investor's side, what does that look like as well? And so maybe I'll shed a little bit of light or offer a point of advice on the entrepreneurial side.
Please.
Around financing this. We talked a little bit earlier about potential sources of financing, but one thing that I really want to harp on here is the importance of bringing all the different stakeholders to the table. That if you're running into some walls with funding or financing, perhaps spend a bit of time thinking about the non-financial stakeholders that are engaged in your process. Community is certainly one of them, but also your engineering, procurement, construction firms. How are you actually going to get this thing built? Your insurance companies. How are you going to mitigate risks through insurance, novel insurance products? Your off-takers, or in other words, your customers. Maybe a corporate strategic. Like, what are the other pieces of the puzzle that make your project comprehensively a strong project? Because I think we all know there's nothing that attracts funders more than FOMO and strong partnerships. So if you can bring those other things to the table, that might be your unlock for the funding side. But Toya, I know right now you sit with an investor hat on through Sustainable Cities Fund. So how are the investors thinking about what they want to see from startups, what they want to see from your community engagement plans?
Always sitting with multiple different hats, but I will 100% put that investor hat on for this moment as we really go towards the end of this conversation. And the key thing I would say as an investor, if you want community to be built in, make sure that you're actually giving some sort of funding towards that aspect. So many times we say that it's a good validation model. As we heard, it can help bridge the barriers, make sure that the timelines stay tight, but it's often the part of the project that's not funded. So how are we as funders, as those who are interested in seeing these projects succeed, making sure that we put our money where our mouth is? Like, how are we giving maybe small scale grants to these organizations who are looking to build out that feasibility, make sure that they're connecting with community so that they have that space within their budget to do so? We are basically out of time, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I do want to make sure that any investors in the room think about how are you breaking down your allocations for funding when you're working with these organizations to prepare them to give you the best possible product.
I'll give one maybe super quick example on that front, which is I'm working with an organization deploying a large renewable energy project, and they have set aside a pool of capital for community-based grants. That's just part of their community engagement plan, is direct funding initiatives to the community. And so, yeah, I don't want to. I know you've got some closing remarks you want to cover, but I think it's interesting to see the different pathways through which organizations are deploying capital and putting their money where their mouth is. But there's certainly not enough of it, and we need more.
I agree, and happy for that example. Just continue thinking about what assets do you have access to, what are the different stakeholders who are part of this journey, so that you can figure out what's the best combination of your financing perspectives, building on that, your whole entire capital stack. So those are the key things that I would definitely say are important as we go into that. And we'll have the opportunity to go into a lot more of that as we dive deeper into the workshops around what does this look like in practice, instead of just all these different keywords that you might hear thrown around all the time. Like, how do I actually do the work? And so really looking forward to actually working with everybody here today so that we can actually start building on that. Thank you.
Yeah, really excited for your workshop right after this. Any final words of wisdom or advice you'd like to impart to the audience today?
That's all I got for now. Stay tuned. But what about you, John?
We'll be upstairs in one of the workshop rooms, and La Toya's put together an amazing workshop. So really excited to see folks up there and engage with you throughout the day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.